Hi guys, Victoria here. Before we get to the podcast, I wanted to be sure you knew about the free online starter course we have available at the Victoria Stilwell Academy called Building Your Dog's Confidence. You can enroll for free anytime from anywhere. So whether you're looking for advice about your dog or you're wanting to test drive VSA before enrolling in one of our professional learning experiences, visit vsdogtrainingacademy.com now to get your free course. That's vsdogtrainingacademy.com. And now, on to the podcast. Every time I do this podcast, I get very excited about the guest that we're going to have speak. And today is no exception because this person changed/influenced my life. I was a trainer in Manhattan, a dog trainer in Manhattan, schlepping from apartment to apartment, training dogs there. And I came across this book called Bones Would Rain from the Sky. And I thought, I'm going to read this book and see what this person, this Suzanne Clothier, has to say. And I remember I started reading it and I did not put it down. I could not put it down because it resonated with me so much. I remember reading this book and actually sweating because I was getting so excited. I know, Suzanne, don't even say it, but I'm just being honest because I was so excited that somebody had finally was talking about relationship, was talking about not just sort of mechanical ways of training dogs, but was really focusing on the relationship that we have with dogs, moving past those technicalities, as she says. And that's why I have always loved Suzanne Clothier. I have heard her speak on numerous occasions at the APDT conference and others. She is funny. She is very self-deprecating. She is extraordinary, and her information changes the way not only you look at dogs, but the way you work with dogs. So I'm so excited to have on the podcast today. Welcome, Suzanne Clothier.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure. I had no idea that I made you sweat so long ago.
You did.
I've heard many things, but I've not heard that one before.
And it's weird because, you know, when I came up with the idea of It's Me or the Dog in late 2004, I did the same thing. I suddenly had this epiphany, this idea, and I started shaking. And I think I do that. I think it's just adrenaline. Adrenaline was going through my body. I think that's what was happening because I was like, gosh, this woman speaks such sense. And that book, among some others as well, but that book especially changed the way that I looked at dogs. And you are now speaking at my conference, which just blows my mind. And you're going to be talking about seeing dogs as individuals, my relationship-centered training, and I'm very excited about that. But first of all, I'm now going to give you a chance to speak. First of all, could you just tell us what made you become, what introduced you to the dog world? Why have you put yourself through all of this pain for so many years?
I have, it's just animals always, forever. And, you know, my first pet was a little frog, and my mother worked at the Pentagon at the time. And the colonel, this is a colonel in the U.S. Army who, he would catch flies to send home to feed my frog. It was very nice. I was looking at earthworms when they brought my baby sister home. And I thought, all right, well, can I go back outside? Because there were some worms I was dealing with. And, you know, okay, great. There's another baby. Got to go. Animals always, forever, always. I wanted to be a horse trainer. I didn't have the money to be a horse trainer. So I decided I would be a dog trainer and have horses as a hobby. And that worked out just fine, far more affordable. Yeah, it's just all about animals. I had a 2-day job as a secretary where I typed
Two
up a
days.
curriculum. 2 days. It was a temporary assignment, and I'm honorable mostly, so I fulfilled the 2-day obligation. But I thought, oh my lord, nope, I'm going back to being a dog trainer. That's just fine. So I've run barns and managed barns and done all that kind of stuff in full watch and stayed up all night watching pregnant mares sleep and fart and which struck me as a perfectly fine job. Typing, wearing pantyhose, going to an office, I just can't. No. Mm-mm. So everything I've done, if there was a fork in the road and one fork was this way lies animals and this way lies money, or it was a no-brainer. It was always whichever way lies animals, that way I'm going. And I remember my grandparents offering to put me through college. They were going to pay all the costs as long as I agreed to be a librarian. And I was just gobsmacked. I was like, a librarian? They said, well, you love to read. I said, well, I like to eat too, but I don't wish to be a chef. So, no, I'm going to go to school for horses. And so everyone refused to support me. So that was fine. And wait till you find out how much hard work it is, they said. I thought, what do you think I've been doing since I was 12 as a barn rat? I now at 64 have the arthritis to show for why 12-year-old children should not be allowed to do heavy barn work, but it's fine. Happy days. So yeah, it's just always been animals, 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 animals. When I met my husband, John, people are like, how does he let you have all those animals? And I thought, that is the strangest sentence. Let me. It's like when you meet me, it's like Dr. Doolittle's little sister. Yes, there will be animals. There will be. And that's all there is to it. So yeah, it's just my great passion. And dog training has just been a great adventure. And I didn't set out to be whatever the heck it is I am right now. I have no idea. An old lady with no color left in her hair. I just set out to learn as much as I could. And then because I love learning and I would tell someone like, oh, did you know I read these studies and I was thinking about this and I think this might be so. And I tried this with my dogs and you want to try it with your dog? And then it's like that scene in Life of Brian where he looks over his shoulder and all these people are following him. And he's like, why are you all following me? That is my life in a nutshell. It's like, I did not set out to do anything except learn as much as I could. And then for the joy, the pure love of learning, share what I've learned with people who are like, well, that is cool. So I know a lot of weird arcane facts, like what happens if you inject lobsters with testosterone. And people are like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I read that article because it was interesting. So thankfully, enough of what I think and learn people are interested in. So I get paid to share it. But
you came out with this book in 2002, which was actually quite forward thinking at that time. Not really the norm. I know there were trainers like Dunbar and others that were, and Karen Pryor and just, sort of changing the way people were looking at dogs. But you took this a step further. How was that book received? It was a bestseller.
It was not a bestseller.
And I know why.
No, it was not.
Well, but it has been since, though, hasn't it?
No, it's
Haven't
just been
you,
no.
It's
been
on lists.
No,
God, well,
it has not been a bestseller. So how it was received, they didn't know what to do with it. There was no category. So they're like, this isn't actually a memoir, and this isn't actually a training book. They didn't know what to do with it. And then on top of that, not only was there no genre that it fit into, confusing everyone, I went through 4 editors before it got published. One quit, one left to be married. It was this orphan that the first editor really loved and pushed for. And then the other 3, it was just an orphan child that landed in their bag of books that they had to promote somehow. So it never got promoted. It never got much attention. And it was dismissed by a lot of people as just, this is all woo-woo. This is way too woo-woo, and it doesn't tell you how to train, which I never said it would. It has a deeper basis, right? It says, let's talk about what's underlying all this. Training is a transaction. That's all it is. It is not a conversation, and it's not a relationship. It is, but it's a very transactional relationship. So it confused a lot of people. However, despite all that, it has persevered and stays in print to my delight. It's a funny little thing. Like, we could not get the British right sold to save our lives. Still can't. It's like, we thought that was a no-brainer, the Brits and their dogs, that they would eat this up, with some sticky toffee pudding. And no, they did not. So go figure. But it's still in print. And now it's kind of considered this classic, which I find hysterically funny, that it went from orphan child, not really marketed, but when it touched people deeply, which is good because it's a big chunk of my soul. It is highly personal. I remember Trish McConnell writing to me and saying, bravo, and how brave you are. Like, I could never be that brave, how honest and open you were. And, 20 years later, she came out with her own version, which was also quite brave and honest. But so people varied from it's very woo-woo, or they weren't ready to hear the message. And so they would put it away. Like, I read that, but I couldn't get past 2 chapters. And 5 years later, they'd crack it and be like, oh, God. Oh. And it's like, huh. And then there's people who read it faithfully, like every year. I think one of the weirdest things I ever had happen was I took a dog to oncology, veterinary oncology specialty practice. And they said, oh, well, we're so delighted to meet you because Bones is so important to the whole staff. I was like, is it? Okay. And they said, yes, every Tuesday we do a little reading from Bones. And I thought, that's just creepy. That's just odd. Thank you. I don't know how to deal with that. Yes. And then my all-time favorite was at the Canadian border. My husband was coming across with one of our dogs after breeding her in Michigan. And he said, the papers are in my wife's name, but this is my wife, and we have different last names. And, and the border guard actually said, oh, well, if this is Suzanne Clothier's dog, well, then you'd best get her home. Waved him through. I was like, alrighty. So, yeah, it's funny to me. It's very funny. Yeah, when it touches people very deeply. And like you, they're like, yes, someone else is, I'm not out here alone. Someone is thinking this and feeling this, because you probably were told you're too soft, you're too emotional, you're projecting onto the animal that they have feelings and emotions. And I just laid it right out there. It's like, oh no, these are sentient beings. These are sentient beings with really rich, complex inner lives and emotions. And I'm not waiting for science to prove that. I know it. I live with them. And this is how I live my life with them. And that changes everything.
I see articles coming out now, and your dog is a sentient being and blah blah blah, like it's a new revelation. I'm like, no. No, people like Suzanne Clothier have been saying that for years before you, write, were practically even born.
Oh yes.
And it, because it's just what is. It's we don't need science to prove it. It's just what is. Just ask any dog lover, any person that spends their lives with dogs, and they know.
I find it really fascinating that science is just hell bent now to prove all kinds of things, and it's a slow glacier, and it has great value, but it is not the end all be all of life. And so it's really interesting things that I have just gone out on a limb and said, and people are like, oh, that's what you said 15, 20 years ago. It's like, it's a joke among all my friends. It's like, well, if you say that, we're going to watch, because 15 to 20 years from now, there will be a study which demonstrates that is so. And it's funny. That's the time frame. But I will say, it's difficult being a pioneer, because just like the pioneers here in the U.S., they had to go, there were no roads, and they got their asses bumped a lot in wooden seats, and, spent miserable cold nights wondering, why have we come this way? There's no one here. except us. And so we have to keep ourselves warm by our own candlelight. And so we did. Mm-hmm.
Your book has longevity. That's better than a flash in the pan and, a gazillion sales right at the beginning and then it fades away. I think that's what I mean. It has longevity. It has a quote. Oh my gosh, I've forgotten the quote from Jane Goodall in it. But, encouraging people to read this. This is very important information. And so, you know what? If it wasn't a bestseller then, it has longevity. And I am encouraging everybody, if you love dogs and are listening to this podcast, that once you finish this, you go and get a copy of the book. Go to SuzanneClothier.com and get a copy of the book and practically everything else that you've got on there, your DVDs, and do courses. And because it is going to really help you with your relationship with your dog. And that brings me to your relationship-centered training, which, as you have written, blends heart and science with a deep appreciation, is unique and dynamic with your dog. So you talk about seeing your dog, each dog is an individual. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because it's always like, what I hear a lot is, oh yeah, I've got a puppy from this litter and this puppy's not at all like that puppy. And of course, we know that dogs come out with their very, very individual ways of being. But obviously, because it's from the same litter, everybody thinks, oh, well, these puppies are they're all going to act exactly the same. Well, of course, that doesn't happen. That's not reality. Reality is very different. But can you talk a little bit about relationship-centered training and seeing your dog as an individual?
So whenever anyone says, I've had more clients than I could shake a stick at, they're like, I don't understand this dog. I've had Goldens all my life, or I've had Cockers all my life, or I've had Pointers since I was a wee thing. And I think, well, do you ever have a family dinner? Have you ever sat down at a family gathering? I rest my case. No. Do you have more friends than one that are blonde? It's just as silly as that. So the individuality of the animal is so evident. It's just so evident to me. And I think that as soon as we start there and say, who are you? It's one of my elemental questions. I have 6 elemental questions that are at the heart of relationship-centered training. And one of them is, who are you? And it believes that there are very specific answers to that question. If I'm to talk with you, I do not mistake you for anyone else. You're Victoria Stilwell and very specifically shaped, and you respond in certain ways. So as soon as I know that, I can then have a relationship which actually is based on feedback and a curiosity about who you are, and care taken to make sure that your sensibilities, your interests, your sense of humor, that I take those into account in my own behavior. So as soon as we accept the other as a very specific and unique individual, we already have begun to shape the relationship. Instead of saying, well, you know how teenage dogs are, and this is what we do with 9-month-old puppies. It's like, well, maybe that 9-month-old puppy, but not this 9-month-old puppy. And what I find interesting is all of us would buck really, really hard against being put into a category. We resent it as a rule. Americans, we can make lots of jokes about Americans, and most of them have some validity, but in the end, don't lump me in the rude American category, because when I travel, I try very, very hard not to be a rude American. And we would all resent, like, well, you know how middle-aged women are. You know how people that wear glasses are. You know how dog trainers are. It's like, what does that mean? It is pointless, and it's destructive, actually, because now we're dealing with a category instead of an actual being. And I tell people Ferdinand the Bull is not just a children's story. It's a really potent symbol for the reality of, yes, maybe you came from a line of fighting bulls, but this bull wants to smell flowers. He wants to be a florist when he grows up. And that's just as true. So we block ourselves from the relationships that we want with our dogs when we do one of two things. One, we assume that we understand who they are, or two, we project onto them what we believe they should be. And in either of those actions, we actually block who they are. And this is what happens with animals. We do it with people as well, but they can fight back. They can talk back and say, no, that is not who I am. And dogs try to, and horses try to, but then they're labeled as dominant or stubborn or stupid or resistant or not, they're trying to be alpha or whatever. And they need to be corrected. I have always found that very sad to see an animal. When I was a kid, they would often put me on horses that other people really fought with a lot. And I didn't like to get hurt, and I didn't like to fall off, though I did a lot. I wanted to figure out what that horse was about because, number one, I didn't want to get hurt, and I didn't want him afraid. There's nothing worse than being on a horse who's scared because it's dangerous for everybody involved. And you get intimately acquainted with that feeling of a horse who is just coiling up inside himself thinking, I don't know that I can handle this. And in fact, I think I'm just going to bolt back to the barn at 5,000 miles an hour and sorry, monkey on my back. And sometimes I think if we had to ride our dogs, if we could be shrunk to the right size for our dogs, we would have such an intimate understanding of their fear, their concern, their worry, their arousal building, their out of control. Oh my God, I've lost my mind. This is so exciting. But we don't. So we have them on the end of the leash, and it's much easier to project down the leash and say, you naughty dog, you bad dog. I have to get some more equipment and put it on you because instead of saying, hey, you're out of control, which we would do with a friend, right? If you showed up in my kitchen and you were just all aflutter and, oh, I just can't believe this happened to me and I'm so upset, I would not go get a leash and put it on you. Victoria, sit down. I'll put the kettle on. I'll make you a cup of tea. Tell me about it. You're like, I can't sit down. I'm too intensely upset. It's like, all right, I don't take it personally, and I would also know that would not be the time to discuss, like business dealings with you or say, hey, we were going to learn to knit today. So let's sit down. Let's get our Victoria, attention. We are knitting. It's like, I can't. I'm upset. But we don't do that with dogs. We believe we miss their emotional state. And because we miss that emotional state, we're sure that somehow we can force them to learn or think or cooperate instead of saying, hey, how do I get you to a place where you are even able to think and cooperate and feel safe? What is that? What do you need for that to be true? So we overwhelm animals. And so I do try really hard to treat it like a relationship with respect for where that other is at. And what Franz de Waal, the great anthropologist, calls objective anthropomorphism, which is you can't help being, who we are, that we're human. So we see things through a human lens, but objectively projecting, if that were me, how might I feel? And then within that species, as I understand it, what does that mean? But with the willingness to get feedback from the animal that says, no, you guessed right. I am really very angry about that. And if you stop doing that, I'll stop trying to bite you. But if you keep doing that, I am going to remain angry and I am going to bite you, or I'm going to remain afraid. So the feedback loop, I think, is lost sometimes when we train rather than we realize we're in a conversation and in a relationship. I don't care how you feel. You will lay down. I don't care how you feel. You will do this. It's like, I would not be in a relationship that had those parameters. And yet we wonder why dogs, given a chance, sometimes think, well, first you're going to have to catch me.
I'm speaking with Suzanne Clothier. And after this short break, Suzanne, I wanted to explore that a little bit more. A quick break here to get a word from this episode's sponsor, the Victoria Still Academy. Now, did you know that I have a school that teaches people to be dog trainers? I love It's Me or the Dog and my work as a dog trainer on television, but those of you who know me know that my true passion really lies with helping other people live their best lives with dogs. And I love seeing that truly magical transformation when that light bulb goes off with someone I'm helping with their dog. That's what it's all about. It's the secret sauce that pet professionals like me, who work with these amazing animals, that's what we all share. It's what makes being a dog trainer the most rewarding, enriching job I can imagine. It's why I love what I do. And it's also why I founded the Victoria Stilwell Academy, so that I could provide a roadmap to others who want to help dogs and the people who love them learn to do what they love doing at the highest level. That is, to become professional dog trainers. Earning a living working with dogs professionally, it's been a dream of mine for years. And that passion is what drives all of us at VSA to create courses that are specially designed to help adult human learners chase their dreams. Now, most people already know about our flagship dog trainer course, which provides both online only and in-person options. But did you know that we also offer both dog guardians and future professionals a fully refundable 10-hour online course taught by me and other awesome VSA faculty, and it's called the Fundamentals of Dog Training and Behavior course. Now, I know it's not the sexiest name, but it's one of the most dynamic learning experiences available to dog geeks, and it's a pretty awesome first step to see if learning with VSA is right for you. Now, as a Positively Podcast listener, you can use promo code PODCAST right now to get the Fundamentals course for 50% off. That is $150 value. So, take our course. Plus, we also have a couple of free starter courses. They're free, completely free, including a course called Building Your Dog's Confidence, which reveals the secret ingredient to a happy dog life. So, I encourage you to check out VSA today. As I said, we have courses for all levels of learners. So it doesn't matter whether you're a newbie with your first puppy or a grizzled vet already making a living as a pet professional. Visit positively.com/VSA to learn more and enroll in a free course. That is positively.com/VSA. We all want the best for our dogs, whether that means you taking home some key tips for your own dogs or adding the ultimate in professional dog trainer education. Visit positively.com/VSA today. VSA, it is the future of dog training. And now, back to the podcast. I'm back with Suzanne Clothier. You were talking about exploring the relationship between us and our canine companions, and something you said struck me right now in the training world is particularly volatile. It always has been between those that sort of espouse to what we call more old style punitive compulsion theories, such as, you know, the dog is alpha, and to those that maybe follow more science-based, more sort of progressive methods, for want of a better word. And interestingly enough, this weekend I was at a friend's 50th birthday party, and we were in the middle of Texas. And I was speaking to a woman that I'd met, and she was another guest at this party, and around my age and from Atlanta. And she was telling us, wanted to show, because you know this as a dog trainer, when you go out anyway and anyone knows, finds out you're a dog trainer or knows your work, they want to show you pictures of their dogs. So and I love it. I mean, we talk dogs all day. I don't care. So show me photographs. And I will go goo goo gaga more than I do with kids. I will. I mean, I love kids too, but I will just go, yeah, that dog's just gorgeous, because it's the way they look in the camera and it's those beautiful eyes, and it just gets me every time. But she was saying, yeah, we've had real problems with this dog, and he was a hound, and he is a hound, and actually he had bitten a couple of times, especially he'd bitten the husband. But we went to a great trainer, and we've learned now that we need to be alpha, and that his behavior was him being dominant over us and him wanting to get, the highest status in the pack. And but now the training that we're doing with him has really helped him see that he's not. and that he is very much, knows his place. And so I said, interesting. How did that? What sort of work did you do? And it was a combination of some what I would call positive reinforcement, but obviously there was all that sort of sword of Damocles. I call the shock collars the sword of Damocles, really, that's always hanging over your head. So you better behave, and so we just started to have a conversation, and my younger self might have got sweaty again and hot under the collar, and kind of like my adrenaline would have gone up. And this is a theme on this podcast. I don't know what it is. It's a theme, Suzanne. I'm so sorry.
It's fine. I will now think of you as a very adrenaline-ridden, sweaty, lovely Brit.
I really
it's
am
fine.
not. but these moments. But I was like, how? But because I think my younger self would have gone, would have been sort of less instructional and a bit more, not attacking, I never did that, but a bit more angry at what she said. But actually we started on this really lovely explorative conversation about why. And so I said, well, but let's explore this whole alpha. And it was we had a long dinner. So, everybody was getting drunk and we were the two people that weren't. So we just started to have this really great conversation. And she was astonished that actually, potentially, this might not be the kind of, or the way that all dogs were trained. She was stunned by it. And so, and I always say, regardless of how you do it, or what you think, or what side of this huge divide you're on, we just all need to shut up and look at the dog. Look at the dog. Really, truly observe the dog. What do you say to that? And what would you say to somebody who says, yeah, it's great, my dog doesn't bite at all now, and now I'm the alpha? What would you say to that person?
So many years ago, when I spoke at APDT, I don't remember which one, just before I went up on the stage, this little reporter, she just dashes up and she's like, if you had just one sentence to say to young trainers, what would it be? I thought, right now, like, seriously. I was like, all right. So here, these are the 3 words that will serve you well anywhere. Whoever you are as a trainer, see the dog. So, see the dog. So encapsulated in that is a world that we can unpack. We could talk for hours about that. What does that mean? In fact, that's the presentation I did for you is just a hint of the iceberg of the ways that I do see the dog and help others see the dog. But it includes, number 1, that we're going to be willing to see the dog, like to set aside our preconceived notions and our assumptions and our biases and just see what's happening. Pure and simple. Like, do we have the observation skills? We might see what we see. So in the case of the hound that's biting, they do see the hound that's biting, and that's scary. And no one likes to be bit. No one likes to be bit. I've met a couple of trainers over the years that, like, I have to take the bite so I know what kind of dog it is. And I thought, right, okay, you're just mad. We just walk away from those people. They proudly show you the scars too. Very strange. So that's a rare subset of wacko. But see the dog means that we actually have the skills to see. So one of the things that's missing in this big divide conversation, I will say there's always been, from the late 80s, early 90s, right? The advent of Dunbar. And before that, there were people that were moving towards more motivational methods, less correction. There's a spectrum. This is not a giant divide where the temple veil split in half one fine day. It didn't. But in the old days, if you didn't like a trainer, you didn't go to their seminar. If you didn't like the club, you didn't join it. you didn't go home and get on your computer and snipe away and send nasty messages anonymously or get into these vitriolic wars on social media. So you're like, oh, I just don't go to that club, or I'm not going to show there because I don't like the way they train. Period. It's done. Like, it's not having this chat. So what we see informs what we do. What we see informs what we understand. And so one of the things I learned early on, I remember being called in by a training club whose methodology I did not particularly like. I would not recommend them. I had many of their dropouts. They were highly punitive, a lot of correction based, a lot of really over the top, scaring dogs, shutting them down. So a lot of their ex-students found their way to me. But they did care enough that when they had a really troublesome club member's dog, they asked me to come in and do a consultation. It was a little Boston Terrier. And two of the club members were convinced that he was a giant liability. He was just, a disaster waiting to happen. I thought, well, number one, it's a Boston. It's not a Bouvier. It's a Boston. Okay, if I can pick it up and hold it at arm's length, we have some limit on the damage it can do, but fair enough. And so this little dog, you could see he was, what I saw, while they presented him as vicious, he bites with no warning, he's bitten his owner, he's tried to bite the instructors, blah, blah, blah. That was their picture. And you have to have respect for what they see, because that is their perspective. And we lose the chance to be informed and to inform, if that's an opportunity, when we don't even respect how someone else is perceiving something. So their perception was that. And I thought, right. So now my next step is I can see the person. Let's start with that, right? I see them. I hear what they're saying. I see their concerns. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I accept that that's their perspective. It's just like looking out one window. You look out one window, I look out another. I'm like, look at that cow. And you're like, I don't see any cows at all, because we're having different perspectives. So then I asked the dog, all right, tell me, let me see you. What do you have to say about this situation? What the dog said was, this is overwhelming for me. I don't feel safe here. In fact, I'm going to park myself, because I am a Boston, I can do this. I'm going to park myself between my owner's ankles. That is the safest place I can find. I watched him come into the building and he was just head on a swivel, just, oh Lord, which direction are the attacking troops coming from? And so when she stopped in the middle of this great big room, there's 3 classes going at once, and his little ears are swiveling and his eyes are darting, and he just parked himself right between her ankles. And that was as small and safe as place as he could get. So I was like, all right, you don't feel safe. This is really anxiety producing for you. It's got your arousal way up. You don't feel safe. You're trying to protect yourself. He tried to get her to pick him up, actually. He climbed up her leg, like, please, hello, hello, hello. And she's like, stop that, stop that. So he's like, all right, if I just tuck between her ankles, maybe I can, have a prayer of staying safe. At which point the instructor goes over and she reaches for him to touch him on the head. And you see his eyes get wide and he stopped breathing and his lips compressed. Nothing happens. From the instructor's point of view, nothing happens. And I remember thinking like, right, okay, I see what's going on. And she does it again. And this time she's patting him on the head further. So now I see his little whisker bed start to rumple up. And you see him, his eyes get hard, like, you should stop doing that. Like, please don't touch me. She takes her hand away, and I thought, oh, okay, she saw that. She does it again, and now he begins to growl, and I see his whole body stiffen up. Takes her hand away, and then she does it one more time, and this time he snaps. He doesn't connect. If he wanted to, he would have been hanging off her hand, but big growl, And she goes, you see what I mean? Just out of the clear blue sky. You see what I mean? And I thought, I do. I see the problem. The problem here is that what you see and understand is not what he believes you see and understand. So he was immensely fair. He escalated appropriately. He gave her all the warnings that another dog savvy dog would have recognized, or a more observant trainer would have recognized. And I realized her skill level at reading dog body language was, if they're not actually snarling or showing you their teeth or growling loud, they're fine. It's like, well, all right then. I call that the coal miner bowling alley moment, where if you go to the bowling alley in coal mining country and you look at the coal miners and they're drinking beer and bowling and having fun with their friends, and you look around and you're like, what's all this talk about coal mining being bad for your lungs? Look at them. They're having fun. They're fine. It's a very superficial look. And it's an unfair look. And so how can I help people see more deeply? It's like, okay, so he did not actually do that. And nowadays we have video. So now video helps us say, let's watch this in slow motion. In the old days, and back in the old days when I was still a whippersnapper, Victoria, yeah, we didn't have video. So I had to educate people's eyes, not by provoking the dog over and over again, but by steering their observations in ways. And I said, okay, so take just a step towards him. What I want you to watch his breathing. And as you step towards him, she is still probably 6 feet away. Watch what changes with his breathing. Now step back. Oh, that means something. It's like, yes. So saved that little guy because the owner was devastated to think she had an aggressive dog. She didn't. She had a fearful dog who was overwhelmed. The club didn't have to kick a long-term member out. The instructors didn't get bit. And it's like, let's set this up. Let's bring him in this way. Give him this spot over here. When it's time to exit, let him go out that door. Bring your classes. In fact, I changed how their flow came because it was like, cross purposes as classes switched. It was a tide of exhausted, tired dogs going out and a tide of completely crazy, woo, dogs coming in. It's like you actually have multiple exits. Let's make that an exit and that an entrance. And we could eliminate most of the arguments. So whenever people say, like, you see that, but they don't, it's like, well, that's my job. My job is to say, what do you say, person? And I believe them. I don't necessarily agree with them. And often I can tell where likelihood is they've misinterpreted or missed signals, like with this little Boston. And then I ask the dog, tell me your side of the story. What do you have to say about this? If they line up, then it's a matter of, all right, that's what we've got going on here. Now let me help both of you find a new way to resolve this so it's comfortable for both of you. And person, just have to say, you may have to give a lot more than we can ask the dog to, because he didn't choose this. You did. But if I have a big discrepancy between the dog's perspective and the handler's perspective, now, like your dinner guest friend there, we have some territory to cover where I have to say, there's a different way to look at that. Have you ever, and I really love drawing parallels from their own experience, because we know so much about being treated in certain ways. We know whether or not we've been respected. I have a friend who is a psychiatric social worker in maximum security prisons. And I asked him, have you ever dealt with someone who was so deranged that they didn't understand relationship? He said, what's really interesting is, he said, there are some that don't respect other people, but all of them knew when they were being respected and when they were actually being listened to, every one of them. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So the goal would be, can I show you a different way? And so that parallel of, do you know what it feels like to have someone misunderstand something that you said? Or, did you ever, I usually try to find out something about them, and try to draw parallels from their own life. Most of us are thousands and thousands of human relationships old. Many of us, there's a little book that I published. I didn't write it, but it's called Separate Lifetimes. And in that one of the chapters, he's talking to a cat. And he's like, hey, I realize I've known lots and lots of horses and cattle and dogs, and you are only the fifth cat in my life. I'm only 5 cats old. So I began asking people that, how many dogs old are you? And sometimes they would say, I'm 4 dogs old. It's like, I'm many dogs old. I'm Methuselah, not quite, but many dogs old. And it just means we've had more practice with relationships. I mean, how could you and I even have this kind of conversation if I was only the 5th person you'd ever really talk to? It would be a very clumsy, by the time most of us get to kindergarten, we've had, hundreds of relationships if we've been well socialized. Some more casual than others, but yeah, so that's always in the back of my mind. How many dogs old is this person? Sometimes I ask them outright, just out of curiosity, and sometimes I just let it become obvious. But I also respect the same way I would with a puppy or a young dog or an unschooled horse. You don't know. Instead of you are willfully plowing this particular philosophy and you intend to hurt, scare, alarm, cause pain to an animal. I don't find that's true. And I think this is so badly missing in this conversation where people are like, well, she used a shock collar. It's like, I know how to use a shock collar. The ironic part is one of the reasons people are like, wow, like you could be a professional, is because in the horse world, I was so good at delivering a correction that the horse was like, got it. I shouldn't do that again. It's like, no. And he's like, oh, okay. And we carry on. They weren't afraid of me. They still trusted me because I was fair. I just choose not to use corrections like that anymore, but I know how.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you're saying that, and that makes me think of Steve White's. Is it 8 rules of punishment? Where, sure, if you're going to deliver punishment, make sure you do it correctly. And here are the 8 ways that you deliver a punishment correctly. And then when you go through the 8 ways, you go, oh, well, I have to deliver it every time the behavior occurs. How am I going to do that when I am not there? My punishment has to be done within a millisecond of the behavior, whatever he says. I'm just paraphrasing. But what happens if I'm too slow and actually I'm punishing the wrong thing? So actually, when you see how many mistakes you can make delivering the punishment, you can see how much damage you can do when you deliver that punishment incorrectly. And so, and also the other thing, and I do want to talk about breeds, because you have German Shepherds. I think you said you have 7 German Shepherds right now. And most people think of us, and I'm just going to do like this with my air quotes, positive trainers. I really don't like that term. But maybe more forward thinking. I don't even like that term either. But many people think that, well, Suzanne, that's fine that you're looking at that sweet little Boston Terrier, but I'm dealing with some big, powerful dogs, and that stuff does not work with them. And I have worked with working dogs, and especially when I was filming with the police for 5 years and started working with them and training with them and going out on calls with them and seeing how these dogs not only responded during training, but also whilst they're actually doing the job, I feel now that I have plenty of experience in talking about how, and all the dogs that I've worked with, that in fact the methods that we like to use actually really do work on these larger, more powerful, again, air quotes, red zone dogs, if they're showing particularly difficult behavior. But you own German Shepherds. You've lived with German Shepherds for years and years and years. Does it work on these big, powerful dogs?
It, of course, I'm on generation number 11, so I've been breeding shepherds for a very long time. It past that, we have Scottish Highland cattle. And Scottish Highland cattle are they're a really interesting breed because they're wicked smart. They're wicked, wicked smart. We also have pigs. We have Gloucestershire Old Spots. And these are not animals that we don't raise them. We've had some bottle babies, of course, over the years, but by and large, they're busy out there living their lives. They're not handled much, and yet we are able to move them, ask them to come here or there. And believe me, these are fast, strong, savvy cattle that are quite athletic. Without laying a glove on them, without putting a halter on them, without having to physically control them, we can gain cooperation from them. Ditto for pigs. If you've ever handled pigs, there are no handles on a pig. Let's just start with that. There's just nothing to hang on to. Yep. And also, as they say, you can fool a pig once. You will never fool a pig with that same technique again, right? So you have to be very honest with pigs. And turns out the Highlands are the same way. And ditto for the horses in my life. I have not required a lot of equipment. They can do a lot of damage. They're big and they're strong and they're fast and they have small brains. Good ones, but interesting and small. As soon as someone tells me how big and strong or intense an animal is, then I know there's an element of fear there. And quite often for good damn cause, right? I do not ever lightly interact with a bull or a 1,600-pound horse or whatever. I remember years ago I had an Olympic dressage rider as one of my students, and I had ridden under her in a couple of lessons and watched her with her own horses. And she brought her dog to my classes. And I remember thinking, like, stop that. Like, stop that. Like, do not do that to your dog again. Because, well, he wasn't paying attention. I said, look, if anyone walked into your barn and did to one of your 1,400-pound warm bloods what you just did to that dog, would that be acceptable? She said, I would fire them on the spot. I said, why are you doing it to a 70-pound dog who has a far better brain than any of your warm bloods? I said, do that again and I'll kick you out. She says, you're joking. I said, I'm not joking. Work with his mind. Work with his mind. So there's a tendency, and again, we're back to really see the human, right? So as soon as they say, you don't understand, then I know that you have some limits and that you may be trying to work with these, I'll borrow that term, though I don't like it. People understand it, the red zone dogs.
Yeah, I don't like it either.
It's like, so what you're describing is an animal who is so non-productively aroused that he can't even think straight. And so if that was a human, we would be also alarmed. And if we gave him a gun, we'd be extremely alarmed. He's not in his right mind and he's got a gun. So when we look at a dog who's got 42 big teeth and has been selectively bred and selected for his willingness to make hard physical contact and is not easily dissuaded and is easily triggered, we have a problem. So there was a club in Belgium, and after seeing my seminar, they said, well, will you come to the club and just work with a couple of the dogs? And I said, sure, it's a Schutzen club. And they get this dog out of the car, and before they even get him out of the van, you can hear the screaming. He's just hysterical. They get him out of the van. You know the scene, right? He comes out. He's on his hind legs. He's being held on a prong collar, and he's just, it's the, canine version of the black stallion losing his mind. Although I don't think the black ever used his mind. Those of us who read Walter Farley knows the black never lost his mind. That's what made him special. But this dog comes out, he's on his hind legs screaming the whole way to the training field. And it's just correction after correction, which just amps him up further. And so by the time they get to the field, they're like, all right, shall we show you what the problem is? I said, I have seen what the problem is. And they're like, you have? but we haven't even asked him to heel yet. I was like, no, because you're going to take him and put him back in the car. And then when he's able to come out of the crate with one quiet down and is able to land and sit and then walk over here under some control and is responsive to you, and you know you've got brakes, can you stop? And he stops. If you were just backing your car out of the driveway and as you put your foot on the brakes, it just kept sailing into the road, no one would say, oh, well, I bet when I get on the highway, it's going to be fine once I get to 70 miles an hour. We don't. We're like, uh-oh, we don't have brakes. And yet horse and dog people do it all the time. The animal's like, yeah, you know what? Don't have any brakes. In fact, I don't have any steering. And we're like, how dare you? Instead of saying, whoa, this is not the state of mind where any of us are going to be safe or learn. So I said, go get this dog and let's start at the van. Let's start at the moment where the interaction occurs. Now, but of course he blows himself out in a couple of minutes. He's exhausted. So what we call red zone dogs is just arousal with no brakes, no steering. And that is not drive. And as you know, having watched police work now, a lot of the dogs they choose as high drive, they're frightening because they actually don't have good brakes and steering. And they are dangerous.
Do not. I think that was a huge eye-opener to me, was that I did not feel safe around many of these dogs.
They're not safe.
And they're not. Wrong. And there's a reason for it, right? I remember Patricia McConnell always saying, if the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, listen.
Believe them. Yes.
Believe them and listen, because that is trying to keep you safe. And then I made I was filming in a police dog seminar, which is a very punitive seminar, actually, for my web series Guardians of the Night. And my teams from Georgia had gone down to attend this seminar. And I was filming it, and then somebody suggested, well, you should do the helicopter stuff. You should do the helicopter training. You should film from inside the helicopter and get it, when the dogs go up in the helicopter and then they circle and they come back down again and then they jump out of the helicopter and run after a decoy. And that's really cool. You should go in there. And so I was like, are you sure? Is that I can do that? And they're like, sure. Yeah. And there was this handler with a absolutely, I don't think could even see straight dog that had absolutely been punitively trained. I mean, this dog was so over threshold and over arousal, and this dog wasn't even seeing straight. This dog was seek and destroy. But I was stupidly assured that actually I would be okay in the helicopter if I sat to one side, and then we would film it that the helicopter would, the dog would come in with the handler. We'd rise up into the sky, fly around a little bit, drop back down onto the field, and then the dog would be released to bite the decoy. And so, somewhat naively, and being kind of excited about the fact that I was going to go into a helicopter, actually, and film this really cool scene. Because as a filmmaker, I want the really cool shots.
Sure.
All reason went out the window. I should have looked into my inner Patricia McConnell and gone, don't do it. Don't be in a confined space with this highly aroused dog and this handler. Don't do it. But I thought, well, I've been assured it's okay. It's got good control. And everything all the red flags that was sort of waving at me, I was ignoring them. So I sat inside the helicopter and I got my camera ready and the rotary blades started. And the dog that was just, he was definitely amped up. When those blades started going, went from 100 to 1,000. And he started pulling towards that helicopter. And I was thinking, okay, well, the handler has my back, so he knows his dog. He should be fine. I'm sure they do this all the time with people in here. And then the dog jumped up as the helicopter was hovering just slightly off the ground, jumped up into the cabin, followed by the handler, and nailed me.
He saw you and thought,
he saw
right,
me.
There's my target.
Absolutely. The sequence, the target, the whole sequence was actually finished right there and then, because this person that he didn't know holding this camera that was sitting there was, oh, okay, I don't have to wait to go up there and then come back down and chase this decoy that I know what the scenario is. I've got the person right there and then. Bam. Full on Malinois bite just above my right knee.
You were very lucky to still be here.
Yes, I am.
You could have bled out.
I'm still lucky to be here, and I'm lucky that I still have my leg. Full on Malinois bite. Then they took this dog off me. Tried to get him to release. He would not. And so they had to choke him off me. And so he was so aroused that there was no way that they were going to get the bite off. So now I have this Malinois hanging off my leg. They choke him out so that by, getting this choke collar and twisting it so he can't breathe. And he releases a little bit and then goes back to bite. And so they actually get him to the point where he passes out for a few seconds to get him off. And they're shocked. And I'm just like weirdly calm. I don't know why. I think it was start of shock.
Mm-hmm.
And I got out, and the first thing I asked them as they were dragging the dog away was, is the dog okay? Is he okay? And I walk back. I don't know how badly I'm injured until I'm walking away. And of course, there are EMTs there anyway. And I walk back, and my partner who was with me, she says, "Your leg is bleeding, Vic." And I went, "No, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine." And she said, "No, you're not." And then 6 weeks later, it was still hard to walk. I remember being taken to a hospital in Alabama and being sewn up. I was a bit out of it. They gave me all these kind of drugs. Interestingly, my surgeon is doing amazing things for autistic people. And amazing, in the middle of Alabama, here's this surgeon that's really changing the world for autistic children when they want to go to live events such as football and, with all of the sensory rooms. So, who you meet. But that showed me that I had to listen to myself and realize, Victoria, you don't have to prove anything, but you don't have to take on the world, and you have to have respect for you made a stupid decision, right? In retrospect, you made a stupid decision. You ignored all your red flags. And so my experience from then on, when I'm teaching young people to be trainers, is that don't ignore your red flags. Even if they're not somebody else's red flags, don't ignore your red flags. And I haven't really talked about this very openly on air before, because the backlash from the police canine community was actually quite fierce towards me. Any kind of criticism that I had made was actually very, I was shocked at the level of vitriol that was directed at me, because I had been training a dog that I couldn't handle and had been bitten by it. Well, actually, I hadn't been training at all. I was literally filming. I was filming these people training, and in that. But so don't ever ignore your red flags, and don't ever feel because somebody else says, well, you're a positive trainer and you can't deal with this. Don't ever feel like you need to prove a point. Don't ever feel like you need to tackle something that is essentially dangerous.
It is very dangerous and has is serious potential. When I was a very young trainer, I worked for 1 week for a German Shepherd breeder. And after a week, he fired me. And it remains one of my most favorite employment moments in my entire life. He brought me into his office, and there was all kinds of strict rules. There were serious protection dogs in that kennel. And back then, they used really aggressive dogs as security dogs. They would drop them off at night in a facility and then pick them up at 7 a.m. And sometimes you pick them up in full bite suits. These were very serious dogs, but they had a purpose. They could go guard a yard or a shop or something. And so there were very strict rules about gates and kennels and what had to be closed. And I thought, oh God, I've made a mistake. He's going to fire me for I've done something dangerous. And he actually said, I'm going to fire you because you're too good. And I thought, what? I'm sorry. You're too good. I feel threatened by you. I'm like, I'm 20 years old. Like, get over yourself. And years later, I saw him at a seminar I was teaching. I was like, you're right. I was too good. But one of the greatest things he ever did, and I will always be grateful to Lee for that, was he put a sleeve on me. And he said, look, I know you love German Shepherds. I know you think you're hot stuff because you can work with big horses that are a little crazy around the edges. But you need to know what this dog is capable of. So he had a Schutzen 3 dog come in. And, the dog's like, oh, the sleeve. Yeah, we're going to play my favorite game. And this was a very sound dog with excellent breaks and really a nice dog. And I loved him, and I had worked with him and done stuff with him. I'm like, oh, great, I'll get to do this with him. And he had him maybe all of 10 feet away from me. And he said, okay, I want you to stand like this and present the sleeve like this. And when he hits you, be sure your knees are flexed and, be prepared. I was like, oh, this will be great. I've played tug with dogs before. This will be awesome. The power of that dog, it was 2 strides. He went from sitting to 1,000 miles an hour. I can still see those jaws coming, clamped onto the sleeve in a beautiful, appropriate bite, and just feeling those teeth compress the steel-lined sleeve on my arm. He says, all right, now get him off you. And I remember thinking, this is no joke. This dog's going to take my shoulder out of the socket because the dog's like, I love this game. He just let me sweat it out for, I don't know, probably 20 minutes. It was probably, 30 seconds.
Yeah. But it feels like 20 minutes.
It seems like quite some time. 4 days later, he called him off. The dog outed beautifully. And sat there like hoping desperately, like, just go ahead and twitch because then I can bite you again. And he said, don't ever forget that. Don't ever forget that. Did you feel that sleeve compressing? I was like, yes. Did you feel how strong that dog was? He says, and this is a sound dog. This is a dog who's in his right mind. This is a dog who's playing the game fair. This is not a dog with dirty bites that will grab anything and everything. Never forget that. And I thought that was one of the kindest things. And I think every young trainer should be put into that situation with a trustworthy dog and say, now let's get really clear about what you're dealing with. Before you get cocky, do not ever underestimate what you're dealing with. This is a serious animal. I'd had my share of serious horses that were just really not wrapped tight. It was a bad sales barn. So every Thursday they'd go get a truckload of horses that they thought they could flip fast. But consequently, I rode a lot of really unstable, poorly schooled, heavily punished horses who were not in their right minds. So great appreciation for what that feels like. And it can go bad, really bad, fast. And so, as they say, right, your wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So welcome to the club of wiser, smarter trainers. Usually have some holes or scars or something to show for it. And
I think
it's a very visceral
and you're
thing.
right. I think
and
humility. Humility is the most important thing. Humility, being understanding in that experience and having some humility. You cannot take on the world, and have some respect for what you are working with at the other end of your leash. Just have some respect. In your in your talk. You are going to be speaking at the conference April 21st to 23rd, everybody. So register now to hear Suzanne speak, because wow, you're gonna learn a lot. But you start off with a quote, and I want to end this podcast with this quote: "Looking and seeing are as different as babbling and speaking. Most people only look and do not see." That is Larry Bates, The Visual Experience. Why did you choose this quote to start off your presentation?
I think because it is almost an art form. So in other little portions of my life, for a brief period, I earned my living as an artist doing animal portraits and teaching animal artwork. And I think one of the greatest aspects that I bring from that part of my life is the teachers who taught me how to see. You think you're looking, no, really learn to see, and that is it's a lifetime of practice. It's a whole nother way. It's like, oh yeah, I see that dog. It's like, no, see the dog. Don't just look at him. See the dog, and not because it changes everything. So one, there has to be the willingness to be curious enough to really, really see without preconceived notions. It's like, oh, he's fine. It's like, I hate that sentence more than I hate most sentences on the planet. He's fine. It's like, how do you define fine? Like, yeah, not the way I define fine. And so I think it's a practice. I think it's almost, for me, really seeing an animal is a meditation on that animal. It confers that there is a need to go deeper, that we're very superficial in this society. It's like, as they say, if your website hasn't loaded up in 22 seconds, they're like, I'm going someplace else. It's like, I'm fine with that, since if you have that attention span, my work will probably be a little too much for you. I'm quite sure about that. But it's not encouraged. Like, just sit. We had a exercise we would do here at the farm with trainers. I would give them an hour and say, go pick any animal on the farm that you like. Anything from our tortoises to, the horses, the donkeys, the cows, the pigs, whatever you want, the cats, the barn cats, the chickens. I don't care. Go watch something for an hour. Like, really, really look at it. And one woman was just outraged. She's muttering, like, this is probably just so you don't have to teach for an hour. And I thought, yes, that's why I put lots of people on my farm and interrupt my life so I can just get out of it. I thought, all right, you're very angry about this, and you're afraid because I think you don't actually think you're going to get it right, And so I saw her, and she watched the pigs for a while, and then she's like, and she went and watched the cow for a while, and then she watched the horse, and you could just see her like, well, this is stupid. And this is stupid. She spent the entire hour practically doing that. The last thing I see is she's sitting down at the edge of the barn, and she's just sitting there. And I thought, right, I can only offer the exercise. You have to want to participate. And to my surprise, when I called everybody in, she didn't respond. And I was like, hey, hello, we're going to gather and talk about what we observed, what we saw with these animals. And she says, oh, that was amazing. And I thought, really? Because it didn't look like that was the experience you're having, but, it would be like watching someone at a dinner party, taking a bite, spitting it out, taking a bite, spitting it out, and then saying, this was a lovely dinner. It's like, was it? Because I didn't see you actually eat anything, but all right. And she says, well, frankly, I was very, very upset, and I was worried I wasn't going to get it right. And I thought, that's what I thought was there, was the fear. And she said, and then I just sat down. I thought, right, there's 15 minutes left. I'm just going to sit here and pretend I'm looking at something. And then a fly landed on her knee, and she started to flick it away. And then she's like, fine, I'll just watch a fly. She goes, do you know that they clean their faces with their little front legs? do you know that you can see right through their legs? Did you know they have like these amazing eyes and the color? And there's like little teeny tiny, like they have little joints. And she spent 15 minutes watching a fly. I was like, God bless you, Mr. Fly, who sat there and educated her. And I
Wow.
thought, right. And it just cracked something open in her. The act of setting aside your preconceived notions, setting aside everything except respect and curiosity. Show me who you are. Let me see. I may not understand what I'm seeing, but it's the beginning of understanding when we actually open our hearts and our minds to see another being for who they are.
Sometimes you can lead and guide somebody to your truth, or what you know to be a truth, or what you know that's going to help them. And with the best intentions, sometimes they need to have their own experience within that to suddenly see it. And I think that goes that's not even dog training. That's living with teenagers. That's talking to college students, right?
It's life.
That's exactly
it's just
it. It's life.
Anyone.
It is.
Just anyone. I have a little blog about a woman who came to a seminar of mine, and she argued with just about every point I made. Her hand would rocket up. She goes, well, that's ridiculous. And she'd been training dogs longer than I'd been alive. So, fair enough. Hats off. And I disagree with that. And my experience says otherwise. And with my dogs, I'm like, oh, fine. Like, I hear you, and here's my perspective, and let's carry on. And I remember thinking as the day went on, she was getting angrier and angrier with me. And I thought, well, on the plus side, maybe she'll be so angry she won't come back for day 2. Like, that could be a silver lining, right? I won't have to deal with her tomorrow. She is registered for tomorrow. Yes, she is. And I thought, all right. And the next morning I look and have my cup of coffee, and here she comes. And I'm like, oh, Lord. Okay. It's just 8 hours. You can do it, Clothier. Just do your thing. Like, you're here to do your thing. She's not the only one in the seminar. Just, you can suck it up and do it. So I put on a smile, and she goes, I'm going to talk to you. And I was like, okay, like at the break, we can chat. And I thought, here we go. And at the break, she's like, I'm going to talk to you privately. I was like, oh, so now I'm going to get reamed out privately. So, all right, I've got tough skin. Let's go. So she takes me around the corner, and she says, I went home and I thought about everything you said. And you infuriated me. And I was like, here we go. And then she burst into tears. I was like, what? Like, of all the things that I thought was going to happen, that was not what I thought was going to happen with this woman who was probably 60 something. She burst into tears because I realized how many of the things you said, they hit me, and I realized how unfair I'd been to some of my dogs. And I don't want to do that anymore. I was like, oh, okay. She's like, so wow. Thank you. She said in a very angry tone, so thank you. I have a lot of work to do. I was like, all right. Came back 6 months later, and people were like, what did you do to her? I was like, I didn't do anything. She did it all by herself. She literally took like a right turn and went in a whole new, So I remember thinking, because people ahead of time would have been like, oh, she's a tough nut. Like, you're not going to change her mind. She knows what she knows. And I just call it the stonecutter story, because diamonds, if you tap them in just the right way, can be cut. And that's it. It's just, you just never know as a teacher or a trainer if you tap just the right way. It may not happen while you're there. You may just be planting seeds, but it may stick in their mind, and they think about it and they chew it over. I mean, I know I do. I'll read something and I think that's baloney. I just think that's bullshit. And but it'll keep popping up, and it's like, you'll be in the shower like, oh, that thought again. Or it'll be an echo. Someone will say, I'm like, again with that. Like, what is up with that? And that's a clue, like, to listen to that inner voice that says, you might want to chew on that for a bit, dear. and find out, there's a reason that's popping up. As you said, when the hairs on the back of your neck go up, then you listen, and you don't have to prove anything to anyone. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe, and no one should try to talk you out of that, the same way we shouldn't talk a dog out of it. But there's other parts, they're like arrows into your heart, and there's this thrumming that says, pay attention. This is important. Like, I don't want to pay attention to that right now. I don't want to look at that right now. It's like, okay, that arrow's not coming out. So boing, it gets knocked into again. You think, right. So I actually have a vision. There's parts of my heart that have some very big arrows that some very wise teachers shot in there. I do not pull them out. I leave them there. They do their job. And if I've lost my mind, I go and doom. I let those vibrate a little again. It's like, remember. Because we all have our weak spots. We all have our blind spots.
We do. And I truly think that, one of those arrows in a good way was from you all those years ago. And so you speak such wonderful sense. I'm very, very excited for our attendees to hear you speak at the Dog Behavior Conference. And for those of you who want to hear more of Suzanne, please, you can register at the conference, dogbehaviorconference.com. Go to her website, SuzanneClothier.com. She's going to change your world. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. And I haven't been sweaty at all. I mean, absolutely
That's what I was
going
to say.
No sweating, no sweating.
Thank you for having me. And I was watching carefully, but you don't appear to be sweating. So well done, Victoria.
I'm good. Take care. Take care. And thank you so much. And that's, I told you, it's going to be an amazing podcast, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. And I will see you on the next episode.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stilwell's Positively podcast. For Victoria's online dog training courses, more information, and helpful dog training tips, visit her official website at positively.com. Become a professional dog trainer with the Victoria Stilwell Academy at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. Get connected on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media as Victoria Stilwell, and follow her on Twitter at Victoria S. Be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps you and your dog live your best life together. Positively.